You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike. Welcome into the Psych with Mike library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan, and I am here with Mr. Brett Newcomb.
Hello.
How are you?
Great.
I'm trying to make sure that
all the equipment is working.
All the equipment is working.
You spend a lot of your life doing that, don't you?
Yeah. Well, we fly this plane with duct tape and rubber bands. Yeah. So,
Well, it's because we can't afford technical expertise.
I am not going to lie. I say this, and I don't want it to sound. I don't care how it sounds. I am damned impressed with the quality of this show, given my level of technical understanding and the equipment that we use to produce it.
Well, that's all you're doing. My entire contribution range has to do with the clinical expertise.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not, looking for a pat on the back, but I'm just saying, I think that what we do.
Well, it's as much a disclaimer as it is a pat on the back.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But I think what we do sounds good. I think it is helpful. I think that people get benefit from it.
You sound like Stuart Smalley. By golly, people like you. Yeah.
I mean, I'm okay if people like us, yeah. But I just really am very happy with and impressed by the level of professionalism. Here's the thing: if you want to make money on a podcast, you got to be on iHeartRadio or NPR or one of the big platforms that can actually push this stuff out to a mass market, right? And some people start small, and iHeartRadio finds them and gives them a contract, and they make it huge. But to just be a guy making a podcast and having that go really big is really, really hard to do. But we have a dedicated, growing audience that is pretty loyal to us, and we at some point are going to get over that threshold. But in the meantime, we do this in single takes with no commercial support, just two guys and a couple of microphones and a GoPro. I mean, it sounds really good.
Well, I'm glad that works that way.
Okay. I'm just talking to myself. That's okay, though.
Well, no, I do this because I think the conversations that we have help refresh for me the critical ingredients in doing therapy. Mm-hmm. And they remind me of the stories and the examples and so on. That I've been doing this for over 30 years. And I don't want it to be reduced down to just the memory of stories. I want to continue to understand, why is therapy relevant? How is therapy helpful? How does one do good therapy? And I think these conversations help with that. Mm-hmm. So that's why I do them.
So did you read the article that I sent about today's topic?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you perceive yourself to have been traumatized as a child?
Oh, absolutely.
You would say that you would say that you were traumatized.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think that. I'm sure that that's a perceptual thing. You could be traumatized, not perceive it, and it has no effect.
Well, a lot of people that are traumatized initially don't perceive it.
Yeah.
One of the questions that we train clinicians to ask of a new client is, do you have a sexual trauma history? And very, very frequently, new clients will say, oh, no, I don't.
Right.
Because they don't know you and they don't want to talk about that stuff, and
right.
they know you're going to ask that question. But the truth of the matter is, some of them are lying. They do have a sexual trauma history. They know it. They're just not ready to talk to you about it. But some of them are not lying,
right.
in that they don't know that they had a sexual trauma history. But over the course of therapy, sometimes that comes out.
And sometimes, and even a lot of times, with something like sexual trauma, that may be repressed. They may not even know that they had a sexual trauma history because they may not actually physically remember it.
Right.
But then there are other people who grew up in households like you, like me, where
Had all kinds of traumas that weren't sexual.
Yeah. And we didn't, when we were young, we didn't know, because you don't have any comparative way to be able to identify that until you start to go hang out at other people's houses or whatever, and you start to say, oh, Tommy's family doesn't, eat dinner at 10 o'clock at night.
That's when you start to do a comparative parental analysis.
Right.
At the age of 4 or 5, or 5 or 6, when you start to go to the neighbor's house.
My wife tells a story to this day that the first time that she came to my house, my parents' house, to eat dinner, she had to call her parents and ask for an extension on her curfew because we had not yet eaten.
Yeah.
And she was like, kept saying to me, are they going to make dinner soon? Are they going to make dinner soon? And I was like, yeah, well, what's the big deal? So eating at 10 o'clock at night was not a thing that most people in my circle...
I didn't realize your family was of Latin origin.
We aren't. We're of alcoholic origin.
Yeah,
but my dad
that's a different issue.
Would go out in the garage and he
not ready
would
to eat until he gets the buzz.
Work in the garage drinking until
the whole family would wait on him to have dinner.
Right. Yeah. And we couldn't ever eat anything unless it was barbecued.
Yeah.
And so at 7:30, 8 o'clock, he'd be like, hey, somebody needs to go start a fire.
Yeah.
We'd go do that, and then we'd be eating at 9:30 or 10. And I didn't think that was abnormal.
Yeah.
Until my wife came over and she was like, I have to call my parents and ask them if I can stay out later because we still haven't eaten.
Yeah.
And they were all like, what is the matter with you people? What kind of emergency is happening?
So 30 years later, what time do you eat dinner now?
What time do my wife and I eat dinner?
Yeah.
Usually dinner is prepared when she gets home from work. It's ready when she... So it's dependent on what time she can...
So that's... you've evolved as a couple? She still don't have to call her mom and say, hey...
Oh, no. I mean, I didn't want to eat dinner at 10 o'clock. That wasn't my idea. I wasn't the one keeping that schedule.
That's the way life is, yeah.
Right.
It rains in this valley, yeah.
So when I had the ability to change that, I did.
Yeah.
But when I was a kid, I didn't, A, have the ability to change it, and B, didn't have the comparative knowledge to understand that it was different than most people.
Or C, the affordability of recognizing it. Because if you saw it clearly, it's like the emperor has no clothes. And you say, hey, at school today I learned everybody eats dinner at 6 o'clock. What's wrong with us? You could get in a lot of trouble.
Right.
So one of the things is you learn what you can and can't
see.
see.
And I think that affordability concept I think that's really important, because you could go through your whole life in denial of the trauma that you experienced as a child, because acknowledgement of that trauma is something that you're not willing to pay the price for.
I tell a story about my family. My parents would get into a fight with each other and decide they weren't talking to each other. So then they would talk to each other through the children. So one parent would say, go tell your father this. And my father could hear it. It was in the room. They do things like that, but neither one of them could ever say, I'm sorry, my fault, I screwed up, can we fix this? They couldn't talk about it. So what would happen is the tension level in the house would become concrete, and it would intensify. And there would come a point at which the storm needed to break. And so one of the children in the house would misbehave in some way.
Right.
And the parent that noticed that would yell at that child and be all over him. And the other parent would come in and jump on him and say, yeah, me too.
Right.
And so they get back together because they recognize, hey, we're good parents, we're disciplining this child this way. So I recognized that pattern as a child. I could see it happen over and over again. And I learned to feel the tension and calibrate it so that when it was time to break, I would go to my brother and say, go in and ask for some candy. Go in and ask if we can go to the movie. Go in and ask if we can watch TV. And my brother would be like, "Bleh, bleh, bleh, bleh," and he would go wandering in and say, "Hey, can I have some cake?" And the
Oh my
storm would
gosh.
break on his head. He never figured that out, but
And
I
and
did.
and to this day, you don't feel like a bad person.
Well, I'm a
I'm just
survivor.
I'm just kidding.
I'm a survivor,
Yeah.
and I learned how to survive.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
didn't.
So
We'll miss him.
that's what Virginia Satir would call the identified patient.
Yeah.
And every family has that scapegoat, but that's a very particular kind of childhood trauma. So you could have childhood trauma, like the childhood trauma that I experienced was never malicious. I don't think anybody ever intended to be hurtful.
I had that too. Yeah.
But it was still, it was very love denying and lack of attachment and connectedness. And that is a kind of trauma. The trauma that you're talking about is this kind of conditioned process of child as the scapegoat. And you can grow up with that, and whether the narrative is factually accurate or not, you can grow up to believe it and then create all kinds of self-fulfilling prophecies throughout your life where that happens over and over and over again.
So the article that you sent me to read in preparation for this conversation was about a study that was done in the Netherlands over a number of years, looking at children with trauma histories in their childhood. And the conclusions that they drew, twofold. Most of these children grew up with depression and anxiety issues, and specifically, and most of them had relationship problem histories. So their relationships weren't good. They didn't satisfy. They weren't mutually beneficial. They might have been mutually destructive. Because what you tend to find is somebody that has the same issue. And you're trying to work it out. That's that whole imago thing. I'm drawing a blank on what the guy's name was, but you try to work through your childhood relationship issues with the partner that you choose. So I think the study was interesting because it indicated that if you have a significant childhood trauma history, you're going to have relational issues, and you're going to have issues with depression and anxiety. So as a therapist, if I internalize that information and I get a new client that comes in and I'm asking them about childhood trauma and looking for it, and it's different iterations. I mean, it can be sexual abuse, it can be emotional abuse, it can be mental abuse, it can be physical abuse, and not just poverty, but more than that. Then I want to assume, and what I teach my students is you make a series of rolling assumptions. So when I start to hear this information unfold, I make an assumption, you're going to have a history of relationship problems. Or I make an assumption, you're going to have a history with depression or anxiety. So then when I ask, do you have a history with anxiety? And very, very often people go, no, especially if they have significant trauma histories. But you watch for the patterns, and you don't confront it and say, well, the data says you do. The data says the odds are 97% that you have anxiety concerns. You don't say that. Even though you know that, you don't say that. What you say is, well, tell me how you react. Have you ever been scared? What makes you afraid? Do you get noises make you afraid? Does someone being angry make you afraid? Let's talk about that. And then how afraid are you? Let's talk about relationships. Who do you pick in your life? So you just invite a safer consideration. You don't apply a label. You don't assign a definition. You are not the authority figure who explains reality, like the angry parent. You're softer than that. And you invite feedback from them. So they have to take a risk. They have to A, see it, and B, say it, and see how you respond to it.
And so what ends up happening in these situations is that the attachment styles, which originally the work for that was done by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, and they identified 4 attachment patterns.
Yeah.
So you have 1, which is secure, and then you have 3, which are insecure. One of the insecures is called disorganized, which we really don't talk much about because a disorganized person is pretty messed up and usually has real difficulty being able to be in committed relationships at all. But so you have these 2 insecure attachment styles, one of which is highly anxious and another one is highly avoidant, right? And what ends up happening is that in the adult presentation of this, a lot of times that highly anxious and that highly avoidant individual will find each other because they mate well together.
Yeah.
And so if you have 2 highly anxious people,
They sing harmony.
yeah, but if you have 2 highly anxious people, they clash too much.
Yeah.
If you have 2 highly avoidant people, they never get together. Yeah. So you have an anxious person.
That's so true in so many
Yeah.
different diagnostic categories. I remember reading a book years ago about the borderline narcissistic couple. The narcissist finds the borderline to be echo to his narcissism. It's funny how we seek out the complementary half of what we need.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's take our break and we'll come back and talk about that some more.
Okay.
Hey, Brett, if you were going to tell somebody to check out something on the internet to help them with their mental health, what would you tell them?
I tell them, listen to Psych with Mike.
Why would you tell them that?
Because it's probably one of the most easily listenable experiences you can have that will give you information that's useful for a whole spectrum of concerns that people have.
I agree, and I have actually been told that by at least a dozen people, several of whom were not married to me, and some of them didn't even know me.
That's amazing.
That is amazing. When we get that kind of feedback from people, it is so incredibly humbling and overwhelming for me.
It is for both of us.
Yeah. So we really appreciate it, and as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike. Okay, we're back, and so who's the gal that used to travel around all over the place doing emotional intelligence? Judith. Anyway.
Viorst?
No. Her book is right over there. Anyway, it doesn't matter. That's bad radio.
Yes, it is. It's bad therapy, too.
But basically, what she had said is that because these 2 individuals, the highly anxious and the highly avoidant person, are meeting each other, and because they're simpatico, and so they get into a relationship that appears to be fairly stable, because the highly anxious person can be highly anxious and the avoidant person will kind of go off and do their own thing. What ends up happening is the way that they understand intimacy is at odds with each other. And so if you can recognize how these attachment styles play out in your adult relationship, it can really help you to take your intimacy to a higher level.
So I agree with everything you're saying.
Okay.
But I would see it differently in terms of a conversation with a client. I used to use the example of a radio transmitter, radio receiver.
Yeah.
With frequencies. And I would say to my clients, if you went down to the arena and there were 10,000 people there and wandered through the crowd, you would only see people on your frequency. We can only send and receive on these channels. The other people that were there, you wouldn't even see them. And so if you have a pattern of finding someone for a relationship that's in the 500 megahertz cycle, all of your relationships are going to be with somebody that has the issues that the 500 megahertz cycle has. So if you get healthy, if you change, God, that's a pejorative, if you get healthy, if you can change the setting on the dial for what you are looking for, then you go back to the same arena with the same 10,000 people, you'll find a whole new group of people. So I used to regularly say to people that were coming in after a divorce or disruption in a relationship, and say, you're not ready yet to find somebody, because you'll go find the same person different shirt, same personality. So give yourself a break. Give yourself some time. Let this thing process.
Right.
And let's see if we can reset the dial so that when you go out tomorrow with your antenna up looking for a connection, you'll find somebody on a different frequency.
And I've always used that radio frequency analogy also. That works when somebody's not in a relationship. So when they're not in a relationship, you talk to them about the radio frequency. I call it
But they're still
an
broadcasting
attractometer.
on one.
Yeah. And I say, just like an altimeter in an airplane, if your altimeter is broken and you fly by that instrument, you're going to die because you're going to crash your airplane. So stop flying with a broken attractometer. Fix the attractometer. And that's exactly what you're talking about. Yes, retune the radio frequency. That works when they're not in a relationship. When they're in a relationship, if they don't want to get out of that relationship, then I talk to them about the attachment styles and how they can understand the way in which each of them uses intimacy. So the anxious person is going to use conflict as a way to provoke intimacy. And the avoidant person is going to use conflict as a way to create distance. So they're going to use conflict at cross purposes, and neither one of them is going to. So the anxious person is going to think, oh, we've got all of this conflict. How come you're not drawn to me? How come we can't stay in the same room and eventually work it out and go have sex? And the avoidant person's like, hey, wait a minute, we have conflict. Why can't you give me some space? I need some time to go off and be by myself.
So another way to describe that uses the term isolator and pursuer.
Okay, yeah.
That they will match up with one another. And what tends to happen, because there's a pendulum in relationships, the isolator runs away and avoids intimacy until they get so far, and the pursuer chases them. What can I do? How can I please you? I fixed this dinner for you. I bought this dress for you. I made these social plans for you. I bought tickets to the ball game, whatever, so that you would be intimate with me. And I'm not talking about sex. I'm talking about relationship.
Right. And we need to make sure that we are.
So you get so far up on the pendulum swing that you're at an extreme, and then the pursuer finally says, screw it. This is not ever going to work. I'm exhausted. I'm depleted. I have no more energy. I quit. And in exactly that instant, they reverse roles. So then the historic pursuer says, I'm just going to go my own way. And the historic isolator says, wait, come back. And the pendulum begins to swing the other way. And it does that to the extreme. And then they switch roles again. And so a lot of relationships that have longevity have cyclical histories of being the isolator or the pursuer. And so if they come to you at some point, you have to try to snapshot, where are you guys? And is this a classic dance that you do? What's your payoff for this dance? What are you getting out of this dance? And what needs need to be addressed if you should want to stop dancing this dance? We put a different record on and see if we have a different way to do it. But we have to find another record, and you have to be open to. Well, I don't tango. I just square dance.
Yeah.
Well, okay. If you want to just always square dance, then these are the ways it's going to look. Can you be at peace with that? Well, no. Yes, maybe. Well, we don't know. So you can see where it goes.
That's actually one of my favorite Phil Collins songs. He has a song called Another Record. And it's exactly, the guy's just playing the same record over and over and over again. And Phil's just standing there saying, hey, put another record on, man. Yeah. Sue Johnson, not Judith. Sue Johnson was the gal that I was talking about, who would go around and talk about this emotional intelligence and this idea of the way in which the John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth attachment styles play out in adulthood is in a book that she wrote with Karen Whitten. And it's on couple dynamics and attachment styles. And she really makes a good case for this whole idea of the pursuer and isolator and the way in which conflict is used in those kinds of situations. And when you can present that and help people understand, this comes back from, this is an artifice. And
it's it's not just you. There's a
your
recognizable
childhood
pattern here.
Yeah.
A lot of people live by this pattern.
Yeah,
You probably recognize other people that you know.
Sure. Well, once you know the pattern, you can recognize it in just about everybody.
So, another segue about doing therapy.
Yeah.
When people come in and they are really distraught and there are significant distressors in their lives, and you work with them to make them stronger and help them have better choice making in their life, the progress will show itself on the extremity of their life. Mm-hmm. If I have somebody that's been abused and harassed and yelled at their entire lives, and I'm trying to teach them to be more self-affirming and self-defending, they will discover it first when they go to the grocery store and somebody butts in the line, and they suddenly have the ability to say, "Excuse me, I was in this line. You need to get behind me." And for them, that's a significant victory. But they're not going to be able to go to grandma's on Thanksgiving and say, "Damn it, I told you I don't like beets. Why do you always serve me beets?" So you're not to expect that you're going to have the ability to confront grandma this Thanksgiving. But you will discover as you get stronger that you can define boundaries that you can live within and be at peace with out on the periphery in the non-significant relationships. The stronger you get, the closer to the center you can go if you choose to.
Yeah. That reminds me of the book Boundaries. Is that?
Yeah, Charles Townsend.
Charles Townsend, yeah. And I think he makes exactly that same point.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, what then I think I would do, let me know if this is,
go ahead.
if you agree.
Of course.
That once that person is able to go to the store and say, "Get thou behind me, Satan, I was in line first," then that's a template. That's something that you have to recognize, and we have to talk about, because you have to give yourself credit for that. Yeah. It's like
you got to water it,
like a sprout,
and
if you don't water it, it's going to die.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you choose to go into the wrong environment and explore this new behavior, then you're self-sabotaging, which is a conversation we had a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, and that's something that we also, though, have to talk about with clients is, don't go off half-cocked or full throttle, whatever analogy you want to use, because, yes, in the wrong environment, you're not ready to deal with what the repercussions of this would be.
Right.
So you got to take baby steps.
But as a clinician, you want to predict that. You want to say, here's a pattern. This is what it looks like. This is how it'll play out. Where you're going to experience some willingness to be more definitive or to have a boundary is in situations like this. And when you feel that, look around, see how dangerous it might be. Don't do it in a place where it's not appropriate. And do it in minimal ways initially, like, "Excuse me, that's my seat."
Right.
And then see how they handle that.
And I think that the more that we become good at doing things like brain scans and being able to identify how childhood traumas actually can change the connectivity in the brain, and then we can look at attachment styles and be able to say, it appears that when you experience childhood trauma, these kinds of things can happen with your attachment. I think the more that we are able to do that, the more that we recognize that more people have experienced this kind of pattern in their lives than may recognize it. And and so, and this will be my closing question: do you believe that people have to go back in history to identify the origin, or do you think they can just fix the situation?
That's one of the classic debates that continues to be significant in therapeutic circles. My particular take on that is no, they don't have to.
Right.
They may benefit from doing it. They may want to, but they don't have to.
Right. And I think I'm in the same place. And what I tell people is, you can do it one of two ways. You can try and fix it in the now, or you can go back and identify the origin, some people need to identify the origin. Some people don't
Yeah, it's
even
an
care about
amazing
that.
reality. Some people do need to know. Oh, it all started when I was 3 years old and fell
Yeah.
out of the crib on my head. Okay.
And if you need to do that, then
Yeah.
you're going to have to do that, or else it's not going to
So
work for
the
you.
challenge clinically about that issue is the whole false memory syndrome issue. If you explore helping clients recover memories, you have to be really professional. You have to be trained. You have to know what you're doing so that you don't lead the witness. You don't create. It's called an iatrogenic artifact, therapist-created artifact. So you can create a memory in a child. Grandpa abused me, punched me in the nose, and that child can believe that that's reality, and they can go and want grandpa arrested or thrown out of the family and create all kinds of drama and distress. You have to make sure that's real and not something that you encouraged. And so if you ever get taken into court for false memory syndrome, then you have to be able to show what your training was, what your skill set is, how you ask questions, do you lead, especially if you use things like hypnosis to do memory recovery. How'd you frame the question? What were you looking for? How did you go there? Where'd you get your training? Who certified you? Or you a charlatan? It gets to be a difficult concern for the therapist.
Yeah, and I don't think that you or I would ever be accused of that false memory situation because we
haven't been yet.
So careful in not doing that. But at the same time, you also have to be very delicate when individuals start to get some of those memories back. That can be
you got to remember that you are
really
not an officer of
overwhelming.
the state. It's not your job to arrest anybody. It's not your job to bring anybody to justice. It's your job to help this individual heal and get stronger.
Yeah.
That may require a confrontation. It may require that they go to the police, but typically it doesn't.
I wouldn't even think about that.
I've had clients that really want to confront Grandpa. Need to go and need to say to him, I know what you did. And sometimes the abusers will say, oh my God, you're right, I'm really sorry, because they've grown. But most of the time they say, why are you destroying the family?
Other people in the family are going to say, why are you saying
Grandpa's old and sick, he has a heart condition, why are you doing this? You're going to kill him.
So you have to work with the client and say,
what's your expectation?
Exactly.
What's your payoff?
What do you think is going to happen with the rest of the family?
And what if you just know what you know?
If that is the case,
you need to rub his nose in. Yeah.
What are you going to get out of that?
What's the payoff?
All right, so hopefully that was good for everybody, and we just wanted to let you know that we are available on YouTube, Psych with Mike on YouTube. You can go there and you can subscribe to the show. That would be great. Even if you don't normally get the show that way, going there and subscribing is really, really helpful for us. You can go on Apple Podcasts and leave us a comment and give us a rating, and that is helpful also. All the music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue. And if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.